will be Kellen Moore's defensive coordinator and offensive coordinator for the 2025 season? Will Taysom Hill stick around for one more year and in New Orleans? And can Spencer Rattler be the starting quarterback this upcoming season? We'll talk about all that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Roslogan. Hope you're having a very, very nice start to your Monday morning. As always, the Straight Up Saints podcast is presented by Scott Vicknair Injury Lawyers. If you've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore, Scott Vicknair handles it all. You give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. The Saints have a very interesting offseason coming up, obviously, with Kellen Moore being the head coach and having decisions to make when it comes to discussing who's going to be on his staff, whether it's defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, assistant coaches around. He's already made 3 hires so far. Keith Williams is going to be retained as the wide receivers coach. Chase Hazlett's coming in as the tight ends coach. And then the O-line coach is going to be Brendan Nugent. So that's what the Saints got down right now. Obviously, going to have to fill out the coordinators. Going to have to figure out who's going to be your quarterback. Going to have to figure out which personnel you really want to value. I'd imagine he likes the wide receiver room, want to add a little bit more talent. Probably got to add another running back. So it's going to be a busy offseason for us Saints fans. And the way this past season went, obviously, there wasn't a ton of hope, wasn't a ton to like. So I think we're all due for an offseason where, hey, Saints will be in the headlines a good bit. Hopefully it's for positive reasons. So let's start off with the coaching staff, because that's kind of the first order of business for Kellen Moore. Before he starts figuring out who's going to be QB1 and who's going to be on the roster again, he's got to figure out who's going to be with him making all these decisions. And I think when it comes to defensive coordinator, he's got an interesting decision to make. Let's start off with what we know. All right. Brandon Staley and Christian Parker, the Eagles defensive backs coach, they met with the Saints on Sunday. Both of them would come into the Saints running 3-4 schemes, which means we're going to see a little bit of philosophy change. All 3 candidates, because Durante Jones also been a candidate for the Saints, all 3-4 systems for New Orleans. So you're at some level going to get a philosophy change on the defensive side of the ball. I'm sure some fans will be happy with that because they're a little bit, feel like the Saints defense has been a little stagnant. So Saints are going to head to 3-4, it seems like. And I think that's going to be very fascinating. How does that affect their draft in terms of how they view certain prospects on the defensive side of the ball? Obviously, that's going to be interesting to see. Brandon Staley's the favorite right now, and everyone's going to talk about Brandon Staley being the favorite. Scott had coaching experience, was defensive coordinator for 1 season with the Rams. I'm a little intrigued by the idea of a Christian Parker, though, because the Eagles defensive backs, in my opinion, that was the unsung hero of that Eagles team. You're going to give the defensive line all the credit in the world. You're going to give Zach Bond all the credit in the world, and rightfully so. The Eagles D-line was fantastic this past season. Zach Bond was fantastic this past season. But, man, the Eagles DBs, that was supposed to be the weakness of their team. They addressed it in the offseason, drafting Quinyon Mitchell, drafting Cooper DeJean, bringing back C.J. Gardner-Johnson, giving Reed Blankenship a bigger role. And, I mean, all 4 of those guys really stepped up for Philly secondary. So, and obviously guys like Darius Slay still playing well, but I think Christian Parker's an interesting candidate. I'm not saying he's going to get the job. It seems like everyone's pointing towards Brandon Staley. Everyone believes it's going to be Brandon Staley, but it's an interesting name to look at. As for Staley, this is where I'm at with Brandon Staley, and I can't say this for every Saints fan, but this is definitely where I'm at with him. The 1 year when he was the Rams DC, he was excellent. But my question is, why did the Chargers struggle so much defensively when he was their head coach? Because if you're going to tell me, well, the Chargers didn't have a lot of talent, that's not true, right? Like, they had Joey Bosa in his prime. They had Derwin James when they drafted him. They went out and they made big moves to add to that defense. Chargers spent a lot of money. They're not afraid to spend money. And that defense struggled. So what was it? Was it not being able to handle the duties of being a head coach and calling the defense? If that's the case, that does make sense. That happens to a lot of coaches. We just saw that with Robert Saleh and the Jets. But I think that is my question for Brandon Staley. If the Saints are to hire him, I'm not going to sit here and say that's a horrible hire, but I would be a little hesitant in terms of what went wrong. Why weren't you consistent as a defensive play caller? So that's what I'd like to see from Brandon Staley and get answered, is that, because it's probably a little easier running a defense when you got prime Aaron Donald, who's one of the 10 best defensive players, in my opinion, to ever play the game, and running everything kind of around him as opposed to not having him there by your side. And obviously when you come to the Saints, you're not going to have a lot of defensive talent to work with. Kool-Aid McKinstry's an intriguing player. Obviously Alontae Taylor, if you play him in the slot, maybe even consider him at safety. I don't know what you're going to move him at, but as long as it's not outside cornerback, He's a very intriguing player. Brian Brzee an intriguing player. But in terms of young talent, the buck kind of stops there. Haven't gotten enough out of Isaiah Foskey. I would argue that Pete Werner at times is a little bit underwhelming, although he got the extension. Safety, Saints don't have anyone of potential packed value at that position. It's really just an old spot for them. And even defensive ends, yeah, Chase Young had a good season towards the end. He's a free agent. Do the Saints bring him back? We'll see. And then Carl Granderson, I've always said I think he could be a really, really good role player. I don't think he could be the premier player for the Saints defense. So we'll see what happens. I do believe it's going to end up being Brandon Staley. I'm a big believer in when there's a lot of smoke. Obviously, that's where it kind of tends to lean. So we'll see where the Saints go. But I do believe that Brandon Staley will be their defensive coordinator, and then they'll kind of go from there. So let's say they go Brandon Staley, or even let's say a Christian Parker, or even get Jones from the Vikings. You got that off the table. Offensive coordinator, I believe, will be Doug Nussmeier. It just seems like there's so much traction towards that potential pairing. And look, when you look at the history of Kellen and Doug, why wouldn't they continue their long-standing partnership of being coaches together? So I believe they'll get the OC hire done. Let's say you get coordinator spots filled. Focus shifts over to the roster. And apparently, Taysom Hill is going to be one of those guys the Saints are going to have to make a decision on. I thought when Taysom Hill had the injury, the torn ACL, and obviously it was brutal, I thought in that moment, man, was that the last time we saw Taysom Hill play for the Saints? And while nothing's been confirmed yet, Ian Rappaport, not once, but twice this past week, was talking about the Saints, talking about Taysom Hill, and he kept saying it's hard to imagine the Saints bring him back. It's hard to imagine him being in a Saints uniform. And I thought about it, and I was like, man, I don't really get it at first because the Saints don't really gain a ton of cap relief if it's a pre-June 1st. Post-June 1st, cutting Taysom Hill saves them $10 million. So right there, that can help pay for your draft class. But I wasn't thinking of it. And yet it kind of does make sense right now with a new coach coming in, new offensive system to kind of start clean and decide, hey, Taysom Hill's not my guy. That's Sean Payton's guy. And look, Taysom Hill could go to Denver and he could actually play a good role for them. They need a little bit more firepower offensively. But I think for New Orleans, you're starting anew. He is in his mid-30s. He's coming off a torn ACL. He's got an $18 million cap hit. Those are factors. Those are all factors the Saints are going to take into consideration. I can understand why they wouldn't be so, lenient towards saying, hey, let's just give Taysom one more year. Let's see how that knee holds up and go from there. So I get it. The fan in me would be a little hurt. I love Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill is one of my favorite players I've watched the last couple of years for the Saints. And when everything went wrong, it feel like Taysom Hill would find a way to make the games entertaining. And I'd say over the last couple of years, not making the playoffs, those 3 years with Dennis Allen, the fun games were the ones where Taysom Hill went off, whether it was against Seattle, whether it was against Cleveland. Those type of Taysom Hill games were a pleasure. And they'll still be a pleasure if he has those type of games, let's say in Denver. It'd still be cool to watch. But I understand why Kellen Moore, who wants to play on a fast track, wants to play with tempo, would understand that, I don't know if I want to kind of throttle back and then go QB power with Taysom Hill. I can understand it. And I think for a new coach, he's entitled in his right to set the tone the way he wants to. Would I love to see Taysom Hill back on the Saints because I do believe they lack a lot of playmakers? Absolutely. Do I understand why he could be out? Same answer for that. Absolutely. So, it's one of those where you kind of juggle the fan side of it with the realism of it. And the fan side of it obviously wants to see Taysom Hill continue to play in New Orleans and do his thing. And the realism of it is, man, they got to get younger. He's coming off a torn ACL. I don't know how he's going to play at that point. And if Kellen Moore's running a system where he doesn't really value a player of Taysom Hill's skill set or doesn't know if that's what he wants to feature in his offense, then maybe you just end up saying, hey, thank you for all your service you've had in New Orleans, and we wish you luck. And I'm sure he would find a new home, particularly Denver, in a heartbeat. So that's kind of where we're at with Taysom Hill. Again, post-June 1st would save $10 million for New Orleans. I could see it happening. I believe it will happen. And I think when guys like Ian Rappaport throw out certain words like that, where they're like, hey, hard to imagine him being back, they got a tough Taysom Hill decision to make, they're kind of telling you without telling you because they want to wait for this offseason to start and not spoil completely everything. So Taysom Hill, I believe, will be on the move this offseason for the Saints. Another decision the Saints are going to have to make. What do they do with Spencer Rattler? That to me is going to be a fascinating one. So Spencer Rattler's situation with his contract, him being just, 24 years old, it's not like you have to worry about cutting Spencer Rattler or anything. Obviously, he's going to be on the roster next year. That's not the question. The question is whether or not Spencer Rattler is going to start. And similar to Ian Rappaport, when he put stuff out there in the air, Tom Pelissero was on Rich Eisen's show last week, and he said a lot of teams around the league were evaluating the Saints position and their roster and looking at it because obviously when you have a job opening, teams are going to be evaluating. And he said a lot of people were impressed with Spencer Rattler. They thought he played well with a very, very subpar supporting cast, which I can't argue with that. You go back to that Monday night game, Spencer Rattler against the Packers. I mean, who the fuck was he throwing to? There was not a lot of guys out there for Spencer Rattler to make shit happen with. So I understand that. I'll say this for the Saints. If Kellen Moore sees potential in Spencer Rattler and says, hey, I think I could maybe work with this, I think this might be the best possible scenario for the Saints, because if it does work, you do have your young quarterback on a very cheap scale salary who can help you play better football, ascend in your reset, while also helping you fix your cap situation. There really is no better situation. Now, if you do play him, and let's say Spencer Rattler flames out, all hope is not lost. If Spencer Rattler were to play poor next year and he was starting all 17 games, the odds of the Saints getting a very high pick and being able to draft their quarterback of the future shoots up exponentially. In a draft that could have Nico from Tennessee, could have Arch Manning, they're going to have options. So I believe that for New Orleans, going with Rattler makes a lot of sense. What I would say, and I wonder where Saints fans would be on this, but this is where I feel right now. I think for the Saints, if you're trying to go with that hard reset because you really, really want to make sure you implement this new Kellen Moore system, you kind of usher in a new era, this is what I would do. I would get rid of Derek Carr. Obviously, I'd keep Spencer Rattler. And if I could, and if he wasn't super expensive, and I don't know what his price tag is going to be, I wouldn't mind them bringing in a veteran like Cooper Rush, who Spencer Rattler can learn from a little bit. But also, if Spencer Rattler's playing and let's say things go off the tracks and he's not playing well and you're on a 6-game losing streak, whatever, Cooper Rush's one spot starts in this game. He is not a starter per se, but if things went terribly south or if Rattler missed time due to an injury, whatever, you at least put him in and you don't feel like now you're an AFL team or an XFL team. Like, no, you are still an NFL team. Cooper Rush has won games and more importantly has history with Kellen Moore. Bringing in a guy like that I think would make a lot of sense for the Saints. So to me, I think the best move might be that combination where you have like an aging vet who's not expensive paired with Spencer Rattler, who isn't expensive, obviously, and does have potential. I thought he had a nice, promising rookie season at times, right? Second half against the Commanders, first half against the Buccaneers in the first game, his debut, first half against the Buccaneers in the season finale. So Rattler has had moments where he's looked like an NFL starting quarterback, and obviously it's the consistency. It's making sure that he's playing with rhythm, he's accurate. Can he figure that out? Time will tell, but I'm okay with the Saints for a season trying it out. And if it doesn't work, you can always move on because he doesn't cost you anything. And if it doesn't work, you're probably picking high anyway. So Spencer Rattler's situation is going to be fascinating. And, you know, when Tom Pelissero mentions that teams around the league found him intriguing and were impressed with him, I wonder what Kellen Moore, his initial thoughts are, because we talked about this last week during the press conference for Kellen Moore. He said a lot of great things about Derek Carr. He also wouldn't name him the starting quarterback for week 1. And I think when you do that, you're leaving the door open to get rid of him. And that's okay. Like, financially, it makes the most sense to keep Derek Carr. But sometimes the financials should not go over what's important, which is establishing a new culture and embracing a new era. And we've seen teams do this before. Russell Wilson and the Broncos last year, they took on a lot of dead money to get rid of him. But even more recent, last week, Jets cutting Aaron Rodgers. They're going to owe him a lot of money. There's a lot of dead cap implied in that move. And yet they say, hey, we're bringing in Aaron Glenn. We're going with that new regime. We don't need you here. So I believe the Saints will, and again, this is just my gut feeling, I believe they will move on from Derek Carr. What do they do with Spencer Rattler? I've made my opinion pretty clear on it. I believe that you can go with him as the starter. If it works, awesome. Like, legit awesome. This is how the Saints would get back on track. If it doesn't work, he's not costing you anything, only 24 years old, and if he completely just spins out of control and just crash lands, guess what? You could draft a quarterback in 2026, which is supposed to be a better quarterback class in the first case, while also using your 2025 picks right now to make the rest of the roster better, whether it's wide receiver, whether it's corner, D-line, O-line, running back, tight end. Saints got so many damn needs. I could list almost every single position. So that's what I think they should do. We'll see if they go that route. So Spencer Rattler, Saints got a decision to make, no doubt about it. So now that we got that all clear, going to go to any comments you guys have, as we always do, to kind of wrap up our live streams with our fan Q&A presented by Sunshine, your hometown John Deere. Nothing runs like a deer. We're going to keep it starting here with Jerry saying the Kellen Moore era is going well with the moves being made. Yeah, minimal moves right now, in my opinion. in terms of what they've done. Like I said, you made a couple of hires, bringing in Nugent, bringing in Hazlitt, keeping Keith Williams. That's kind of it right now. But obviously, the interview process is going on. I had defensive coordinator interviews yesterday. Brandon Staley and Christian Parker both met with the Saints yesterday. Doug Nussmeier's met with the Saints. So it's that time of the year. GJ says it's going to be a busy offseason, but it's refreshing to see something new brewing and not seeing the same old thing. Who dat? Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of us Saints fans, and that's a big reason why, besides the fact that Saints fans just don't like Derek Carr, I think getting rid of Derek Carr, too, is like the final straw towards ushering in that new era of Saints football, right? New head coach, new DC, new defensive system if you go 3-4, new offensive system with Kellen Moore running the show, new quarterback. That's kind of why I think it's another reason, maybe I'm off track there. I think that's another reason why Saints fans are more than comfortable with them doing that. Margaret says, I'm sad that Rizzy went to the Broncos. I thought he did a good job as our special teams coordinator. I understand why he wasn't hired again, but it sucks. Yeah, look, I get it, Margaret. And look, ideally, you'd love a world where Darren Rizzy was on this staff because it'd be another type of, enforcer and a guy that shit's not going to get passed. And honestly would make that staff better. But if you're Darren Rizzy, obviously, and you're going for that position, you're going for head coach. You're not going to end up being assistant coach to a guy who won the job over you. So I get it. So he goes to Denver. If he has success in Denver, who knows? Maybe he'll be a head coaching candidate again in a couple of years from now. So we'll see. Louisiana says, I think with Brandon, hopefully it's one of those Dennis Allen types things. When Dennis was strictly DC, we were good. When he was head coach, we were trash. Hopefully, if Brandon's strictly DC, he's better. Yeah, and I will say, the thing that makes the Staley thing complicated is we just don't know because he's only been defensive coordinator for 1 year. And that is where it really is a fascinating scenario. Because to your point, Dennis Allen, we have the history. We've seen him be a good defensive coordinator before he became a head coach, and we've seen him be a good defensive coordinator again before he became a head coach again. Staley is DC to head coach to never a DC again. We don't know. So it is possible. And I do think that is a thing that Saints fans have to consider is when you're a head coach, there's so much on your plate that you start to lose sight of certain things. And I think I would say a guy like a Wade Phillips back then, right, as a head coach of the Cowboys, maybe not great, maybe middle tier. Defensive coordinator with the Broncos, excellent. Defensive coordinator with the Rams, excellent. So we'll see what happens with Brandon Staley, but it's a possibility. Xavier says, was there any update on how the two interviews went yesterday? Not that I've heard. Not that I've heard yet, but we'll see what happens. A lot of people still continue to mention Brandon Staley as the favorite and expect him to get the job. But we'll see. I mean, obviously, Christian Parker comes in with a lot of momentum with what the Eagles were able to do, especially in that secondary of his. Maybe he can knock him off. So we'll see what happens. Jerry says, newsflash, no, Aaron Rodgers is not coming to New Orleans. Yeah, Aaron Rodgers definitely is not coming to the Saints. It just doesn't make any sense. I think if you're interested in where Aaron Rodgers goes, I say you probably look at a place like Pittsburgh if you're looking at the higher end. If you're looking at the lower end, I actually think the two places that will be in the market for Aaron Rodgers, whether he wants to go there or not, we'll see, would be Tennessee, which obviously is in a full-on rebuild, but they're not a guaranteed position to draft a quarterback. I know they're picking number 1, but there's no guarantee they take a quarterback. And then would be Vegas with Pete Carroll, maybe him as a bridge for 1 year. Not ideal, though. Why would you want to go up against Denver, Kansas City, and LA? So we'll see what happens with Rodgers. I just know, to your point, Jerry, he's not going to New Orleans. Let Taysom go to the Broncos. Taysom and Juwan might go to the Broncos. I bet Sean's waiting right now. Taysom for sure. I think Taysom for sure would go to Denver. I don't know about Juwan yet. Jerry says, I wouldn't mind if Taysom Hill stays, but if he goes to another team, I got no issue with that. Yeah, I think for sure. And look, I think for Taysom, like I said, the fan aspect of it, yeah, I want to see Taysom continue to play for the Saints. I think Taysom Hill's an all-timer for the Saints over the last 10 years, the way he played, that selfishness, the willingness to put your pride to the side, not be selfish, and play a bunch of positions, even though deep down you want to play quarterback. But you'll play receiver, you'll play tight end, you'll play special teams, you'll play running back, you'll take the hits, you'll make the hits. That was Taysom. But again, like I said, even though I love him, he's a great player, I think it's okay if the Saints move on, and I understand why they would. Wesley says, it's telling that Kellen referred to AK and Taysom as pieces when he referred to Carr as a starter in the league. Look, that part didn't fascinate me as much as, when the second part. The pieces part I don't care for. I think that's just the coach doing his usual terminology. But you mentioned it. He referred to Carr as a tremendous quarterback in this league. And yet when he was asked, hey, well, does that mean he's the starter? Well, we got to evaluate the roster. And I think Kellen did a really good job of keeping things down the middle. You don't want to make any dumb comments about Derek Carr, which he didn't make any dumb comments about Derek Carr, but you also don't want to tip your hand. So New Orleans can kind of play this out. Remember, third day of the new league year, they're going to owe him more guaranteed money, which means a decision is going to be made before then, and we'll go from there. But I think Kellen did a good job handling those questions because that obviously is at the top of every Saints fan's mind. Praise YHWH says draft O-line or pass rusher at 9, wide receiver at 40, DB at 71, Rattler will cook. I mean, I'd love to think so. I do believe they could use another weapon, though, and I think O-line obviously needs to get better, no doubt about it. If you get O-line better, you can add a weapon over the middle of the field, then I think what you're doing, I don't want to say you're making it fail-proof, but what you're kind of doing is making sure enough pieces are around Spencer Rattler that if he doesn't play well, you could say, hey, it's probably just the quarterback. It's not the weapons around him. Because this past season, and I've told people to pump the brakes a little bit, Rattler, but I'm not an idiot. I could tell you to pump the brakes and also say, man, look at the guys he was throwing to, right? And it's not to knock those players and say they're not NFL guys, but they're not supposed to be the guys that are the impact players. Dante Pettis is not supposed to be your wide receiver 2. Kevin Austin's not supposed to be your wide receiver 3. MVS is not supposed to be your wide receiver 1. So, I understand that, and obviously that comes into it, but I do agree, look, all those positions you mentioned, the Saints have needs, and they got to address them. In what manner they do, I don't really care, as long as they get impact football players. But I think if you could add more talent around him, it'd be interesting. Xavier says, I think Rattler can be our Brock Purdy, cheap and serviceable. That would be the dream, obviously. I know a lot of people get into discussion whether or not Brock Purdy's good. I think he's a very good quarterback. If the Saints can get a guy like that, obviously, it fixes a ton of stuff. The only difference I would say is not for sure having the play caller where, with the Niners, Shanahan is a proven coach. But yeah, that is the hope, right? That Rattler is your serviceable young quarterback that comes in, can be the starter of the future, and also kind of gets you in a really good situation financially. So that would definitely be in my opinion, the ideal scenario for the Saints right now, quarterback. Louisiana says, give me T-Mac or Burden or Mason Taylor. Big Rat can cook with that. Spence can run Kellen's system. I hope so. And look, that's what I want to see, man. That's what I really want to see. For me, I'm not like this whole it's Rattler or bust thing. If the Saints want a different option, that's fine. I just don't want the Saints to run back what we've been seeing because I just don't think this does anything other than, all right, it shores up your books a little bit. I don't think the Saints should play it that way. I think the Saints should be looking at this as a rebuild/reset, and it makes sense to move on from Derek, and it makes sense to give Spencer Rattler a try and see if this works. They owe it to themselves to see if it can, and they owe it to Kellen Moore, I think, if this is what he wants. And we'll see, obviously, because I do think he's going to get his decision at the quarterback spot. I don't think this is going to be one that's kind of, thrusted upon him. Kermit says Rattler is more like Hurts, Herbert, and Prescott than Carr is. Yes and no. I actually do think Derek Carr and Dak are kind of similar in terms of where they rank in the league. And at this stage, especially with Dak not being as mobile as he's been in the past, I do think Derek has a stronger arm than Dak. But if you get what I mean, right? Like they're kind of limited right now. Dak, early year Dak, when he was using his legs, way more dynamic of a quarterback. Herbert, obviously, I'd say he's the most talented of the group you mentioned. And then Hurts, I think, just gets it. Like very even keel, never too high, never too low. He just gets it. But I understand what you're meaning by that. But we'll see. I think it's too early for me to say where I would put him in there. Praise YHWH says Mason Taylor has to be a Saint or we have failed due to the stud and in our backyard already. What I would say about that, and I don't know for sure if it's going to happen, but not only is that one of those positions where you say, oh, he's in our backyard, he's at a dire position of need. Because I think tight end, tight end's usually viewed as like when you draft one high, people go, oh, it's a luxury pick. The Saints really need to get better at that position. So they can take someone with a luxury pick at that position, and it could be a Mason Taylor. And I wouldn't get mad because I do believe they really have to shore up that spot. So I'd be totally okay with them going there. Saints should go after Gentry or Scatterbo. Alvin's 30. Kendrick's trash. We need that type of young talent. I don't know if they will go Gentry, though. I'm kind of thinking they don't. That's just me. Maybe I'm wrong. I do want them to get a running back, though. And I will go as we get closer. Once the Saints get through their coaching hires, I'll probably shift more into draft mode and free agency mode, although free agency probably ain't going to do shit because they won't have money. I'll shift into draft mode. They're going to need to add a running back. Because to your point, how in the world can you rely on Kendrick Miller? I just don't think you can. I just don't see it. Nat says, I hope Spencer's the quarterback, but it'll be hard to get under the cap without Carr on the team. So Carr will be the quarterback. Won't say that for sure. Won't say it for sure, just because I think the Saints may have came out and said it already if they felt that way. I do believe behind closed doors, they're having those discussions. They're talking about possibly moving on from Derek Carr. It's going to be tough for them. But like I said, teams have made tough decisions. Russell Wilson last year with the Broncos, Aaron Rodgers this year with the Jets. Saints can't be afraid. If they believe cutting Derek Carr or ideally trading Derek Carr would be best for them, then you go it. Xavier says, you think there's any validity to Dart getting drafted? I don't know. I feel like for me, when it's this early in the offseason, like it's middle of February, I think there's a lot of smoke that goes around. How much of it is true, I don't really know. I just think it's kind of rumor season, you know? What I will say is Saints can kind of shut things down pretty quick. If they go out there in the offseason and let's say they cut Derek Carr, but they bring in an aging vet and they still have Spencer Rattler, I don't probably think they draft a quarterback. I think they probably just roll out with that duo and kind of see what happens. And whether it's good or bad, only time would tell, but I think they would roll with that. So we'll see. Jackson Dart's an intriguing prospect. I would not love if they took him at 9. I think that would kind of be rough. I'm also one of those people that says if you believe a guy's your franchise quarterback, I could live with the decision. But I don't know. I think everyone's trying to convince themselves that Kellen Moore has to draft his quarterback this year. But if the Saints go about this the right way and they're not rushing the process, he doesn't have to take Jackson Dart this year. I don't have to take any quarterback this year. So we'll see. We'll see what the Saints do and if they're willing enough to kind of slow play this as they should. Paul says, cut or trade Derek Carr and build the offense, defensive line through the draft, cut the fat on the team. The cutting the fat part's going to be tough because they're not going to get enough financial gain out of cutting the fat. But, you know, in terms of trading Derek Carr, if you could, that would be ideal. Whether or not you can find a trade suitor is tough. Obviously, the no trade clause in his contract makes things complicated and infuriating at the same time. So we'll see what happens. But, you know, I do agree with you. Building the O-line and D-line, it's easier said than done because we've seen the Saints use resources. Isaiah Foskey, Peyton Turner, Marcus Davenport, Brian Brzee, although Brzee obviously the best of that bunch. O-line-wise, Fuaga, Penning, McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, Saldiveri, like they have drafted in the trenches, you know? So I believe that for this team, you know, they've invested. They're not hitting on those picks, though. So you still got to invest because we just saw what the Eagles did. When you're great in the trenches, win the damn Super Bowl. But, you know, they got to start hitting on these picks. That to me is the number one thing. Kermit says Dart is overhyped and can't throw a spiral to save his life. Whoa, Q says Clyde is good, but yeah, we need another one. Yeah, look, Clyde can... If they go into next year and Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the number 3, I'm cool with that. If they go into next year and Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the number 2, you're fucked. I'm sorry. And I know people love Clyde because he's an LSU guy, but his career's been bad. And it's okay to say that. Like, he's had a bad NFL career. And, you know, yeah, bringing him back because he doesn't cost anything is, in my opinion, okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But got to get more running back juice into this backfield. Maybe get a guy that could be that kind of home run threat. Raphael says, what's up, bro? Who dat? What's going on, Raphael? Says, do you think we're getting rid of Taysom Hill? I do. I do personally think they're getting rid of Taysom Hill. I don't know when that move would be announced, but I believe they will with a post-June 1st designation. I think that's where it's heading. Margaret says the Saints are already $48 million with old contracts. They'll never get out of cap hell. One is Michael Thomas. They will get out of it. It's just going to take another 2 years, but they will get out of it. St. John Butler says, does Kellen Moore get a pass regardless of record in 2025, considering what he was tasked to do this year? I'd say so, but curious what you think. Love that question, John. Hope you're doing well, John. I would say he, you know, as long as things aren't off the rails in terms of locker room being, you know, closing in and the Saints going 2-15, then yeah, I would give him a pass. What matters to me are a couple things. Does it seem like he can be a good leader of men? And does it seem like he can run that system to perfection, or not even perfection? Can he run a high-level offense while still being the head coach? Because it's going to be more on his plate. So as long as he does those two things, the Saints can go 4-13, 5-12, and I wouldn't really care. You know, would I be upset that they won that minimal game? Sure. But if I'm talking about giving a pass or not, yeah, he would get a pass. You know, if he can't keep things under control and there's fights on the sidelines and the Saints are 2-15, that's the scenario, the doomsday one, where you can't give him a pass and it looks like a train wreck. But as long as the team is in command and it seems like they're building towards something good, then yes, I do believe that, you know, I'm more than okay with giving him a pass. And I kind of think that's where it's heading, personally, in terms of what this team is going to end up looking like. Eddie the Don says, good morning, everyone. Who dat just won another top 10 pick for next with enough trades through the season. We can get a lot of draft capital. Hopefully. I mean, that's important for them. They got to start building that draft capital up. You got to start hitting on those picks. You know, everyone loves to talk about why the Saints are where they're at, and they'll blame the cap, and they'll blame the quarterback. I would say you blame the drafting. When you're missing on draft picks, you're in a really, really tough spot. Kermit says, of course, Kellen Moore gets a pass this year. Duh. Xavier says, I think we could draft Quinshawn Junkins late in the draft and be dynamic and running back to avoid drafting Genty at 9. Look, I think for the running back spot, you're always going to have your guy. Look, I don't know where he's going to go. Probably be second round, which means you probably don't end up taking him. But I believe a guy like Trevion Henderson from Ohio State's got that home run hitting capability, and I think he'd end up being a pretty good back. So we'll see. Even Dylan Sampson from Tennessee, I don't mind him. So you don't have to go Genty. I love Genty, but you don't got to go Genty. Eddie the Don says, get Becton and Josh Palmer free agency, address the rest in the draft. Love the idea of those two guys. I think Josh Palmer's a very, very underrated wide receiver, and he's had success with the Chargers. And obviously for Kellen Moore, there's that connection. So I love what you're thinking there. Becton, I think, is going to be priced out, though. I believe he'll be priced out of the Saints range. But I do love the idea of adding Becton, because if you add Becton, be honest, man, Becton, McCoy, Fuaga, hopefully Penning takes the next step. Ruiz would be the weak link, and you hope that you can get by with that. Bring back a Debo if we aren't priced out. I agree with that, but I do believe they're going to be priced out, you know? Why draft Quinshawn, who isn't as good as Cam Scattaboo? I don't know. Look, I'm not going to get into the running back debate. I think there's going to be options. I'm really not worried. Charles says, do you think Sean Payton would trade for Taysom Hill? I don't think trade. I think if he knows that the Saints would consider cutting him, he would just say, hey, let's just call your bluff and let him get cut. Walter says, just imagine all the Saints fans that hate everything and think Derek Carr is terrible all probably had to drop their wives off to their boyfriend's house on Valentine's Day. Well, if that isn't the fucking lamest comment I've seen. And look, I'm going to be honest, man. This Derek Carr stuff kind of cracks me up. There's so much debate about a mediocre quarterback. He's not a bad quarterback at all. And I've also said, everyone who knows the Saints quarterback room, if you're saying who's the best option, yeah, in terms of best option, in terms of talent, it's probably Derek Carr, no doubt. But he doesn't fit this timeline, and he sure as shit ain't worth the money that the Saints pay him. And he's not going to do anything to kind of expedite that rebuild. He also, by the way, for people upset about it, Derek Carr would be better off with the Saints moving on as well. It's not just like, oh, Saints cutting Carr is going to make them better. Derek Carr is going to be better off too. He's not going to be a part of a rebuild. He can maybe go to a team where the roster's a little bit better and his average style of quarterback play is a better chess piece to that team. So this debate over Derek Carr is so fucking laughable because he's not that dude. And he's not even worth having these debates. And I talked about it on Twitter. You know, the last couple months, I would probably yell about this. I'm over yelling about it because he's not that good. He's never won a fucking playoff game in his career. And the Saints signed him hoping he could take that next step for them. I commended the move at the time when the Saints made it. I said, fuck it, let's do it. I like this idea. And guess what? They had the worst schedule in the league that year, that first year, and they went 9-8. And we could blame Dennis Allen all we want, and I think that's fine to blame Dennis Allen. Derek Carr also stunk for the first 2 months of the season. So that part mattered too. So look, if Derek leaves the Saints, I'm not going to be one of those petty people who said I don't wish him well. I do wish him well. I got no beef with the dude, but he doesn't fit this timeline. So for Saints fans wanting Derek Carr gone, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with wanting Derek Carr gone. He doesn't fit this timeline at all. He don't fit this team at all. And I think his behavior doesn't fit what the Saints want. That isn't what they want. They're a guy who's ducking the Super Bowl week in New Orleans to post his highlights on Instagram while bragging about going back to Fresno. I don't think that's what the Saints want, man. So if you Raiders fans want him back, by all means, when he gets cut by the Saints in a couple weeks by now, go sign him back. And I hope you guys enjoy your 6 wins, 7 wins, and no playoffs. Saints are going to be worse than the Raiders next year. I'm not doubting that. But they're not going to go anywhere with Derek Carr. So I'm definitely cool with them moving on from him. Kermit says Carr is garbage. 12 years, 0 playoff wins. Can't excel a team. Hope he just all right. That part is a little harsh. I'm not gonna wish injury on him just because his fans are a little crazy. DJ says the lengths that people go to defend him should be studied in a government lab. It's kind of nuts. It goes both ways though. I've noticed the Saints quarterback debate's been exhausting. Right before Derek Carr, people were doing this with Jameis, and I said the same thing about Jameis. Jameis isn't worth me getting all excited about or hyped up about or arguing about. Like, Jameis was a mediocre quarterback with some really high highs and some really, really low lows. And people yet debated, oh, wrong move, right move, keeping him. Didn't care about that. And I'm going to be honest, the way Saints fans argue, we're probably heading this way with Spencer Rattler if he starts. People are going to hype him up. People are going to put him down. And he'll probably be somewhere in that middle at the start. So it kind of just ends up being that way. Paul says keeping Derek Carr keeps the Saints in purgatory. I agree with that for sure. Anyone saying he's the best thing that the Saints got are delusional Raiders fans. I can't argue with that. I can't argue with that. So we had a little bit of Derek Carr debate. With that said, you guys have any more comments, thoughts, suggestions about what you'd like to see the Saints do? Put them in the chat below and we'll get to them. But just want to take a quick word from DraftKings Sportsbook.
This ain't the little itty bitty teeny tiny bowl. This is Super Bowl 59. Get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of Super Bowl 59. Scoring touchdowns is key to hoisting the Vince Lombardi Trophy, and you have a shot to score big by betting on them at DraftKings Sportsbook, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. New DraftKings customers can bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code BOOT. That's code BOOT, B-O-O-T, for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 and over. Age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in New Hampshire, Oregon, and Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/ftball. NFL Plus Premium offer available only to new and former NFL Plus subscribers. Additional NFL Plus Premium terms at nfl.com/terms.
Thank you again to DraftKings Sports for being part of the program. We greatly appreciate it. Going to keep it rolling with any other comments we have here. Going to go with Shaqzilla saying that's how they were with BI on the Pels side. Yeah, I saw that a lot of Brandon Ingram debates with whether or not he was worth keeping. And in the long run, he ends up getting traded. And you'd imagine had he gotten traded years earlier, would have got much better value on the return. Giovanni says, would you be okay with drafting Dart and letting him learn from Carr for 1 year? I'll say this. If that is what Kellen Moore thinks is the best scenario for the Saints quarterback room, I'm not going to argue with it. That guy knows way more football than my dumbass knows. So if that's what he would prefer, that's fine. I know this sounds like a cop-out. I'm very flexible as to what the Saints do at quarterback. The only thing I don't want to hear anymore is like getting blown up in mentions about any suggestion I may possibly make. Because certain people don't like it. But if that's what he said, like, hey, you bring in Jackson Dart, he sits behind Carr, and that could work, and financially it makes the most sense for this team, then fuck it. Like, we ride. Like, I'm a Saints fan above all else, so that's cool with me. I just don't think that's the route they're going to go. And the only reason I'm not in love with that one is, honestly, and this might surprise people, is the idea of possibly taking Jackson Dart 9. I just feel like the Saints have so many holes on this roster. I'd love for them to go out there and go get a player who is going to have immediate impact. I mentioned him before, and I keep mentioning him, so I'm sorry for being repetitive. But I think if the Saints were to get a guy like a Will Johnson from Michigan at 9, I know deep down in my heart that guy is going to be an impact player day one, and you're going to get immediate value from him. And all of a sudden, one position group on your team is strengthened in a major way. Whereas I don't know what Jackson Dart's going to be, and 9 might be a little rich for my blood. If that's what they go with, I'm going to be there to say, hey, I hope it goes well. But I definitely, where I rank it in terms of strategies, I don't know how high I would rank it. Kermit says bridge quarterbacks don't make $150 million. Yeah, I mean, now he is technically a bridge. When the Saints signed him, they signed Derek Carr to be the missing piece, the guy that elevates the roster, and obviously just didn't work out the way it was. But yeah, bridge quarterback to this point, it's weird. We're kind of losing the art of bridge quarterbacks. The new thing that's becoming popular in the NFL is signing these guys who were drafted early, flamed out, and hoping their second go around can be really good. A Geno Smith, a Sam Darnold. Who knows? Justin Fields might be the next guy on that list. So that's kind of been the new thing. I feel like the bridge quarterbacks kind of lost its sauce a little bit because outside of Gardner Minshew, there aren't a lot of whole bridge quarterbacks. Gardner Minshew's one of them. I think Russell Wilson's become one at this stage in his career. But kind of lost the art of bridge quarterbacks in this league, which is kind of funny. Although who knows, Saints might go the bridge route at some point too this offseason. And I, like I mentioned, if they do go that route, my guess would be a guy like Cooper Rush, because there is no better bridge probably than a good old Cooper Rush where it's plain Jane at the quarterback spot. But we'll see what the Saints do. And obviously we'll see what happens with Derek Carr. I think it's going to be interesting if the Saints do get rid of Derek Carr. Where does he end up is the fascinating question. I wonder if a team maybe like Pittsburgh goes after him. That might actually be a pretty good spot for him. Eddie the Don says, does Kellen get to have his own scouting team, or does he have to trust Ireland and the front office? I think it's Ireland in the front office doing that. Ireland, Mickey Loomis, all those type of guys in the front. It's still their show. I do believe he would have say. I do believe he would have say in where they go, you know? So that to me is probably what ends up happening. Walter says Carr's 100% ending up on the Colts. Yeah, I think that would be a good spot for him. I do think you still have some talent right now with Pittman, Michael Pittman. You got Jonathan Taylor. Pierce has gotten a little bit better. Downs obviously a really good receiver. And even if Anthony Richardson was good, which he's not, he's never healthy. So that would be a really good spot for Derek Carr, actually, now that you mentioned it. And I actually do think that makes a lot of sense. Indy usually likes going after quarterbacks like Derek Carr, where they bring in a vet in the room. So you play indoors, weak division. That would make a lot of sense, actually. That's a very good option to pick up. Kermit says Andy Dalton is a bridge quarterback. Yep, for sure. Andy Dalton can 100% come back, teach Rattler a little something, and Bryce Younger, him and Bryce Younger are going to be ballers. Bryce, man, he finished strong. I got to give him his credit. I got to give him his credit. AR is damn good at quarterback. He just doesn't take it serious. I don't agree with that part personally. I'm not going to get into the Anthony Richardson debate because I don't care enough about Anthony Richardson, but you cannot be if you're going to tell me his low completion percentage and inaccuracies all like because he doesn't care, I don't know how true that is. I don't know. I don't know the guy personally. What I will say, though, is you can't complete that minimum amount of passes and be considered, damn good, because I think Anthony Richardson had the sickest throw of last season, but he probably also had some of the worst throws last season. And I think just also factoring the fact that he's never healthy is a big problem. So he'll be one of those great unknowns. And I think every coach can probably think, hey, deep down, I can fix his problems, but it's just tough to do. But we'll see what happens with Indy. Obviously, that's not a Saints worry or connection until if they make a Derek Carr move and whether that ends up happening. So we'll see where the Saints go that route. Greg says, are you doing a mock draft? At the moment, right now, no, but I will do a mock draft for you guys. I'll do one of those where we share a screen and we go through it. Maybe what we could do, if you guys want, as we get closer, maybe March, we'll do a split screen, a share screen, and we'll kind of let you guys make the picks if you want. We'll do like a group vote on who can make the picks, and we'll go from there. I don't know if we'll do all 7 rounds, though. Let's go with at least the first 3, maybe first 4, because you feel like you're getting players that'll make an impact, and we'll go from there. But maybe that's what we'll end up doing here for Bucher Media. We'll do a draft where you guys in the chat will go by most votes for who will be the pick at that spot, Tet McMillan at 9 needs to happen for real. Never seen a receiver that smooth at that side with hands that strong. I think he would give them a whole new element for sure. I think he would definitely give them a whole new element. And I think they need another weapon. So if they go get him, especially at 9, I feel like 9 would be tremendous value for him. So I'd be cool with it. Eddie the Don says, do we know where training camp will be? I know it's early, but I was wondering. I know Mickey Loomis was talking about possibly still being, back home for training camp this year. We'll see what happens. Do you think the Saints will start Rattler? I don't know yet. I do think it's a strong possibility, though. I think it's a very strong possibility. Obviously, the Derek Carr decision's got to be made first. And once that gets made, Derek Carr is the big domino that will affect everything else, obviously. So we'll go from there. But I do think there is a legit possibility. I'm kind of 50-50 on whether or not he starts. As long as Cam is the second pick in our draft, it's a W. We'll see. If he gets enough votes, we'll go with Cam. Add a little bit of juice to the backfield. So I'd be cool with that. Louisiana says, definitely take a lot of pressure off Chris, too, if we land T-Mac or Burton. Yeah, I think that's the big thing, right? If you take pressure off Olave and you add that big-bodied wide receiver, and then also we have Shaheed who could be that deep threat over the top, that's a nasty wide receiver trio. That really is. And if you're looking for something as Saints fans to be excited about, and you're also looking for the Saints to have a calling card on offense, man, wouldn't it be that? Having that wide receiver room, that would be tremendous, Eddie the Don says, what can we realistically get for Carr? I don't know. I think it also comes down to, absorbing that contract as the other team. That makes it a little bit difficult. I think if you were to just say contract aside, what is Derek Carr worth? Probably like a third or fourth round pick, maybe a fourth round pick. Especially if you're a team trying to get ahead of the ball. I think that comes down to two. If ideally you got like two teams that really want Derek Carr, one of them probably trades for him just so they avoid the other team signing him in free agency. But maybe fourth round pick. I think that's probably where I'm at. Hoping Rattler starts. That would be exciting. That would be exciting Saints football. I'm sure a lot of people kind of feel that way, and I'd be fine with it. McMillan with Olave, Shaheed. Yeah, look, look. If you start putting that together, I think that you're probably talking about an offense that will have some juice to them. I think talking about an offense that have a lot of juice to it, and that would be the selling point as why you got to invest in them. Do you have any thoughts on Will Campbell? I'm interested if he had longer arms. He's probably the number one overall pick. Unfortunately, 6'6" with the wingspan of guy. That's funny. Look, I like the idea of adding more O-line talent to this team. And if Will was there at 9, I'd be fine. But Will's not even going to be there at 9, in my opinion. So I'm not super worried about it. I'm not going to get too caught up in Will. I would imagine he might make sense for a team maybe like the Jets if they want to get better at the O-line. That could make sense for them. So we'll see what happens. Mike Green at 9, Jalen Walker, but he's going to go to Carolina. We need speed rushers ASAP. Yeah, I do think they need to get better in the pass rush. I've been begging for them to kind of change up their model. They've been, sticking to having, what's it called? Like these big ass defensive ends where they look at they're built like power forwards in the NBA instead of actually just getting guys that could get to the quarterback. And that's kind of killed them, right? So if they can move on from Isaiah Foskey's of the world and kind of get towards having those speed rushers, I'd be cool with it. Louisiana says, I can see all the sicko things Kellen Moore would do with that kind of offense. Yeah, look, man, you have like McMillan, Olave, Shaheed, Alvin. Ideally, add a tight end because, they need another tight. They need a tight end in the worst way. I think that's how you start getting towards a promising Saints offense. There's no doubt about it. So we'll see what this Saints team decides to do. But it's going to be an interesting offseason. Like I mentioned, guys, got to hire the coordinators. I'd imagine they're going to do that at some point this week. I believe they will name their coordinators. And whenever they do, you're going to go out there. We're going to come out here and have some shows and talk about what they do. And then once you get past the coordinators, you got to make your decisions personnel-wise, right? What do you do with Derek Carr? If it's Derek Carr on the team, okay. What do you do in terms of getting salary cap compliant? If you're getting rid of Derek Carr, are you rolling with Rattler? Are you going with someone else in terms of the quarterback spot? So I think for the Saints, it's going to be very interesting to see how this all breaks down. But they're going to have a very, very, very fascinating offseason, and we're going to try to cover it every step of the way here for you guys at Boot Crew Media. If you're running a 3-4 defense, you're going to need to speed on the edge, no doubt about it. And I think that's why we're going to finally get to that. And I can't wait because, man, this team really, really needs to get some speed on this defense. They're lacking it in the trenches for sure. How do you feel about Trey Harris out of Ole Miss in the second or third round? I'd be cool with it. Look, I think the Saints need to get to adding wide receiver talent. I think Trey kind of at 6'2" kind of fits that mold of getting a bigger wide receiver, which I believe they'll need. But I'm open to any talent offensively for them, man. Any talent offensively to add. So if you get Trey on day 2, I'd be cool with it. Anthony says, I hope Mason Graham drops to 9. Would be cool with him getting Mason Graham. Putting him with Brian Brzee would be a pretty nice pairing, I think. I think that's where you kind of go. Jamal says, are the Saints going to 3-4 defense? It seems that way. It absolutely seems that way with the candidates that they brought in. And we'll see what they end up doing personnel-wise once they make that shift. But it does believe whether it is Staley, whether it is Christian Parker, we'll see what they end up doing. It's going to be fascinating to see. But anyway, guys, we've been here for about 50 minutes. The Saints going to have a busy week, so I got to get back to monitoring what the heck they end up doing and whether or not they make moves. Really appreciate you guys coming in on this Monday and sharing all your thoughts, your suggestions, whether it's draft, coach, personnel, roster, all that crap. You guys have been fantastic, so I really can't thank you guys enough. We'll be back here with more content later this week for sure, but I do believe they're going to make the coordinator hire, so we'll have videos covering that. Hopefully we get some interviews in over the next couple of weeks as well for you guys to keep you busy here at Boot Crew Media. So make sure you guys subscribe for more content and stay tuned here on the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.